The Great Barrier Reef has deteriorated to a critical condition, according to a UNESCO advisory body. The International Union for Conservation of Nature found 3 mass coral bleaching events in the past 5 years have led to a dramatic decline in the reef's World Heritage value. Senior research scientist at the Australian Institute of Marine Science, Dr. Lena Bay, says some signs of recovery have been found.
I get to go to the reef for just a few brief weeks a year, but luckily here from the Australian Institute of Marine Science, we've got people on the reef every single day, and that includes monitors that have looked at the condition of the Great Barrier Reef over the last 30 years.
And what have they found?
And so the results from their work is very clear. We're seeing a slow but steady decline in the coral cover on the Great Barrier Reef. But in their most recent survey, they also found some signs of recovery. And it's important to recognise here that when we say this, we're talking about the overall coral cover on the reef. There are many reefs, in fact, about a third of the reefs that they monitor, where the latest survey found quite moderate to high coral cover.
Okay, and so as someone who's passionately working in the field, how do you feel about what is happening to the reef in our generation?
Well, I, along with all my coral colleagues, are very concerned about what we're seeing on the reef unfolding at the moment. It's really clear that climate change is not a future threat to this incredible ecosystem. It's a clear and present danger and a reality. And so what we are really focused on is doing the science that is really needed to support the best management of the reef into the future.
And so tell us about the work you do and the ability of corals to adapt.
Yeah, so my work over the last decade or slightly longer, it has been to try and understand how corals can adapt to these changing conditions. And what we've found is that corals are individuals. Some are more tolerant than others. They have genes that underpin heat tolerance, and they can pass these on to their offspring. So what this means is that they do have all the hallmarks that enable them to adapt. But what we're concerned about is whether they can adapt fast enough to these rates of change that we're seeing in the environment. 3 bleaching events over the last 5 years, that's a lot of disturbance for a reef to cope with.
And that bleaching is linked to climate change?
So the mass bleaching that we're seeing on the Great Barrier Reef is very clearly linked with elevated temperatures, with hot water that sits on the reef. And that hot water, the temperature of our reef waters have increased over the last 50 or so years.
And so what have you found about the limitations of coral in terms of adapting to that warming climate?
Yeah, so what we've found is, as I said, that some corals are more temperature tolerant than others, and that is good news for the reef. So what our research is really focused on at the moment is whether we can support or enhance these natural processes, and they involve things like understanding where these heat-tolerant corals are, developing tools so we can identify them, and then understand whether we could enhance rates of adaptation, for example, through seeding these naturally tolerant corals on cooler but warming reefs.
Yeah. And now, when's the coral spawning going to happen?
So coral spawning has already started. I got reports from our teams that we saw signs of that last night here at the National Simulator. We are expecting some big events, some mass spawning tonight and over the couple of days. And this is an incredibly exciting time, a very busy time for coral biologists, but we think of it a bit like Christmas. It's just really fantastic event to witness, but it's also a time where we try to do all the research that we think is so critically important so we can help and support our reefs into the future.